History shapes everything we do and everything we believe. Across the centuries, a few have written the stories of humanity, and in doing so, have silenced countless others. Choke Points Through Time is where those voices are heard again. Join Dr. Wayne Sedlak, linguist, scholar of ancient languages and history, pastor, former missionary to Africa, graduate school dean, and professor, as he opens the door to our forgotten past. From the tablets of lost civilizations to the chronicles of empires long fallen, discover the truths history tried to hide and the forces that still shape our world today. Choke Points Through Time, a journey through the pivotal moments of mankind's story. This is history as you've never heard it before. And now, here is Dr. Wayne Sedlak.
Well, hello. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of Choke Points Through Time. Before I begin, I'd like to again express my appreciation and thank all of you who visited us from time to time. Certainly it's appreciated that you would comment, you would like us, you would share us with others. You can find us anywhere there are podcasts, just about, Apple and Spotify and Rumble. One thing you can do, I'd invite you to leave us comments on topics that you'd like to have us address. Perhaps in the future, we can take that opportunity to address those issues, things that are dear to you, questions that you might have. I can't promise I can answer anything, not by a long shot, but I can at least, I could try. So in any event, again, I thank you for joining us. This particular episode of Choke Points begins with the word theostages. It's a Greek word. It means hatred for God. There are to my knowledge, five major proofs of the existence of God. I'm not going to attempt those proofs here and now. I'm going to introduce, however, one of them. The problem of enmity. Enmity is that word theostages, whereby God tells us in his word that man goes astray as soon as he is born speaking lies. The Apostle Paul, as well as Moses, Isaiah, the psalmist, tells us that man is by nature, of course, fallen, but in that fallen nature, he expresses a hatred. And in Romans chapter 8 at verse 7, that hatred is very pointedly made. It's not that people may necessarily sit around and shake their fist at God. Obviously, there are those that do. But the Bible tells us that when the law of the Lord is brought forward, there is enmity. Because man will not subject himself to a standard given by God. In fact, the verse says in Romans 8:7, neither indeed can man do that. Not only will we not do it, we can't. We can't do anything but demonstrate our offense toward God according to his law. That's what's built into the term theostages. So although men may like the idea that there is someone up there somewhere called God or Nirvana or whatever they might call him, or it, the point is, when it comes to God's law in the Christian religion, as revealed in the scriptures, there's offense taken. And it's specific to God revealing himself in his word. In fact, that verse highlights the law of God in particular. Our carnal nature reacts against it. That's a universal response of all people. The law of the Lord. Unless Christ transforms the heart, we will demonstrate either in word or in action our offense. that offense may appear to lie dormant in us. Well, tell you what, why don't we illustrate it? In a place called Jericho. According to the biblical record, Jericho was the first city attacked by Israel under the leadership of Joshua. And in attacking that city, Joshua and Israel surrounded the city and marched around it upwards of 7 times. And the walls came down. Now, John Garstang, the archaeologist, excavated Jericho from 1932 to 1936. And he found that, in fact, as is common throughout the ancient Near East, that Jericho, called City D, the fourth Jericho up, because you see, oftentimes a city would be buried, lay dormant in its ruins for a couple of centuries, and then be rebuilt with the materials from the previous city. And Jericho had gone through that, in fact, over a long period of time. Garstang noticed a number of issues that conform to the biblical record. Now, he's going to come to a conclusion that Jericho was destroyed by the Israelites under Joshua, according to the details given in Joshua, in about the year 1400 BC. He gave the latest date to be 1376 BC. So there's a range there. Could have been a little earlier, but that had been pushing it. So he found a number of issues, and this is what helped him to date the city. They dug in cemeteries that had been used by City D, Jericho. In the cemeteries, they found, among the buried items that were there, they found Egyptian scarabs. They found jewelry dating from that 1400 BC dating time. They found scarabs, they found jewelry, they found a number of artifacts. Pottery, for example, very common to the 1400 era. So when you're dealing with that era, pottery that was used, Egyptian scarabs, remember, they're just down the road from Egypt. They're trading with Egypt. Jewelry, many other artifacts. But they found other things. For example, there were hastily built walls. Garstang commented that it was clear that the people of Jericho were frightened. They built the walls, in fact, quite thick. The outer wall, the inner wall, was built hastily. Why? Because they were afraid. Israel had crossed over Jordan. They're on their way, and they had spies, meaning Jericho, had spies watching the Israelites, and they knew that Joshua had sent spies into the area. Indeed, he had. They had visited inside Jericho. Rahab comes to mind. They stayed with her, the upper loft, and hid themselves from the Jericho police. So Jericho was frightened. In fact, we are told that, according to the scripture, that the whole region was scared to death of Israel. Why? Because they knew, we're told from the record, the people knew what had been done to Pharaoh and his army. He was buried at the bottom of the Red Sea. And what had happened to Og and Sihon, the large kingdoms on the eastern side of Jordan. Israel had destroyed them. Word had gotten around the ancient Near East. And so Jericho was first in line. They knew they were right in the path of Israel as they crossed the Jordan River. And so they built these walls hastily. Garstang pointed out that something occurred, and that something was an earthquake. The walls were not destroyed by, the siege engines that would come against them. Normally in a battle, you would mount platforms that would have battering rams or platforms with archers or with sling stones. None of that occurred. The walls had been burned, they were scorched, and they fell outward, an earthquake. And so the very shaking, the walls come tumbling down, as the song says. The walls did, in fact, explode outward, consistent with the earthquake that caused those walls to come down. Now, we're talking about the outer wall being, about 20 feet thick? And the distance from there to the inner wall was at places about 26 feet, and that was a 12-foot thick wall. So we're talking about substantial walls, albeit hastily built. That isn't all. Garstang studied the pottery from the era. He studied over 100,000 pieces of pottery, fragments of pottery, another 1,500 intact vessels he studied, plus the walls themselves, the burnt walls, the city that was in ruins from the earthquake. To make sure that he was dating things correctly, he consulted pottery experts among archaeologists. The names of those: Pierre Vincent, Clarence Fisher, and Alan Rowe. They came to the same conclusion he did, that Jericho, City D, was destroyed at about 1400 BC. Garstang did his homework. So, of course, we have the enmity of the people of Canaan against God's people, no doubt. But there's a lot more to the story. You see, when word got out of John Garstang's dating, which conformed to the dating of the Bible, 1400 BC, that area, in fact, to be more specific, we know the Bible identifies the time period. In fact, it says, "It came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, they began to build the house of the Lord." 1 Kings chapter 6 at verse 1. Well, that particular dating means that the 4th year in which he began to build, you take it back 480 years to the time when Israel came into the land. They out of the wilderness and into the land. That takes us to a time at about 1436, when they came out of Egypt. A 40-year sojourn in the wilderness brings it down to 1397. That's when they crossed over Jordan. So we're at 1397. That's pretty close. In fact, that is the dating that's consistent with the Bible. So the facts of the archaeology of City D, the city of Jericho, you have burning, you have walls that exploded downward, tumbled down the hill. Remember, this was a citadel mounted on a hill. Israel went up straightway into the city. That's consistent with a direct attack. The place was open. There are no walls in front of them. The city was in ruins and on fire. In many places, of course, the fire didn't reach, and archaeologists found large areas of grain that had not been eaten. Now, why would that be significant? You see, the Bible tells us that that the Israelites attacked at the time of the harvest. They first took the Passover together. Then they went to Jericho. It was not a long siege at all, about 7 days or so. That's it. and they attacked. Now, why is that important? Normally, archaeologists find that grain is seized in the ancient Near East by those that besiege cities. Why? Because grain is valuable. It was actually used as currency. This city's stores of grain, large vats of grain, were intact. Now, if you recall, God had ordered Israel not to touch anything in Jericho. Now, Achan and his family had done so, and they were put to death for it, because they destroyed the testimony of what the Lord had commanded in a number of areas, including this one I'm about to make. You see, God said that only a few items would be taken. Some of the gold and the silver would be taken out by Joshua and the elders. That's it. They're not to take the grain. It was normal to be taken by other besiegers, but God has left a testimony. This was not your normal siege. The grain was intact. It was not taken. Now, as for the enmity, word got out. For 20 years, journalists, even politicians of different nations, representatives of different religions, archaeologists, scientists, clamored for someone to come along and disprove John Garstang's findings. Well, from 1952 to 1958, Miss Kathleen Kenyon went and excavated at Jericho. She drew the conclusion. She stated that Garstang had mistakenly made or drawn some conclusions about the dating of the city's walls. She herself, she used carbon-14, but she herself at another location and in print had stated that carbon-14 was not reliable enough to depend upon in the state of knowledge they had then, even though she used it concerning Jericho. She further went on to state that the fact that there was no pottery of a Cyprian type. Cyprian pottery was very common in that area. Pottery that was traded from Cyprus. And since she couldn't find any at Jericho, she concluded that Jericho was uninhabited at the date that Garstang had given. That the wall itself that she found that Garstang had dated, the way she put it was, it's to be dated about 800 years or so earlier in time. Therefore concluding that Garstang got it wrong. Well, there's a few problems. No one knows why she ignored Garstang's findings of pottery, other kinds of pottery that were common at 1400. And as for the dating of the walls, being 800 years earlier, what was not stated was that that was the time in which the wall had been constructed, not the time in which it was in existence during the siege. Her statements imply the latter, but in actuality, the wall was built then. They say, okay, well, still 800 years earlier. Well, that's fine if in America, if you're building a house, we're used to seeing a house last, a couple of decades or more. We're used to that kind of thinking, but in the ancient world, when a city was ruined, people would build on the city, and they'd take materials from the earlier city, which was under them, filled in. If that city got ruined, and there's a variety of things that could do that, they're still using the building materials. Let me illustrate. Kathleen Kenyon illustrates that very same issue at Jerusalem, of all places. She found an area that had been a wall that had been intact as part of the Jebusite fortress of Jerusalem when King David attacked in about 1000 BC. Now, she didn't conclude what I would have expected her to conclude. I would have expected her to say, well, you see, that wall is dated from a much earlier period, and indeed it was about 1,000 years. Ultimately, she mentioned the wall at about 150 years earlier, that particular era of the Jebusite occupation. But what she didn't do is conclude as she had done at Jericho. There were too many scholars that she knew would differ with her, I'm sure. She didn't conclude, well, since the wall is at least 150 years old and even older for the building materials that were used, therefore King David could not have taken Jerusalem. She never concluded that. Why, is my question. Neither did anybody else. I'm not questioning Kathleen Kenyon so much. You'd be the judge. I am questioning the clamor, the outpouring of, quite literally, hatred against John Garstang and his results at Jericho for 20 years' worth. At Jerusalem, see, Miss Garstang would have known that Jerusalem had been occupied much earlier. In fact, the same walled materials, the same stones have been used over and over again from a time earlier than David and in the days of David, and in fact, all the way down to as early as about 450 BC in the days of Nehemiah. Remember, Nehemiah came back from Babylon? They used the rubble of Jerusalem that had been destroyed in 586. They used it to rebuild Jerusalem at about 450 or so. So you see, the same walls, the same stones are being used over and over again. At Jericho, she had discovered a piece of wall that was built originally much earlier in history. That same piece of wall was used by the people of Jericho at that time, and there's no way to disprove that. So her statement lacks, shall we say, clarity. Her carbon-14 dating, she stated openly, was unreliable in the state of knowledge at that time, 1952 to 1958. Yet what do we find at Jericho? We find the grain intact, showing that those that besieged the city were obeying Joshua's order not to touch anything except a few things that the Lord had instructed. They were gold and silver, and that would be for the tabernacle was built. They found burned items. They found, by the way, also ovens that had bread in it. The people were still cooking when suddenly the walls came down. So it was a sudden fall of Jericho, even as the scriptures tell us. There's evidences like that throughout the city, that people were going about their normal business, feeling safe behind the walls, even though they were afraid of Israel. They pretty much figured those walls were going to keep them until the earthquake took them out. The fire started, Israel attacked, Jericho was destroyed. They found the jewelry, the pottery, the Egyptian scarabs, and they dated the jewelry and the scarabs from the reigns of Thutmose III, Amenhotep II. They found these dates. Those are the dates you find for the Egyptian pharaohs of the era. Queen Hatshepsut, Amenhotep II, Thutmose III. These are the pharaohs of the era prior to and during the time that Jericho was being attacked by Israel. There's a lot of evidence that conforms to the biblical record. In fact, it shows that the biblical record was precise. But enmity won't let it go. There are still many articles, many books, historians that were taught, and this is, by the way, a problem in ancient Near Eastern teaching in classrooms around the world. Somebody who's educated, say, in the 50s and 60s, becomes a professor, is teaching in the 90s or in this current millennium since 2000. Invariably, they don't change their notes. They learned at one point such and such, and they kind of stay with it. Not all do, but it's enough of a problem. They don't keep up on it. So you find books, in fact, out of my library, the very library you see behind me. There are historians there who deny all of this, yet they don't refute the issue of the pottery, the scarabs, the jewelry, the earthquakes, the hastily built walls, the dating painstakingly dealt with by those whom Garstang consulted, Per Vincent, Clarence Fisher, and Ellen Rowe, experts in pottery. 100,000 pieces of pottery, fragments. Garstang actually found pottery, popular to that era, not even mentioned. And these professors don't cite these things. You know, I can understand missing a fact or two, but I have a better explanation for that. From the journalists who clamored to throw John Garstang's conclusions out, give us a solution. You know why? Because they're stuck with the scriptures. It's funny that when you look at Jericho, I understand that there is, on the wall, there is an apartment complex still intact. The walls came tumbling down. But Rahab was instructed to throw linen rope out of the window so she and her family would be protected. That would have been all for naught. It doesn't do any good to throw that out there and show Israel, hey, we're here, save us, as Joshua had commanded. If her apartment had been destroyed by the earthquake, see what I'm getting at? The walls are destroyed, the city's burned, there's one apartment complex that's still intact. Now, I'm sure that enmity would say, you can't prove that that's hers. Well, no. If you isolate just that, or if you just isolate the bins of grain, or if you just isolate the pottery from about 1400, or if you just isolate the hastily built walls and the earthquake that throws them down, if you just isolate one fact at a time, you can mount all kinds of arguments against each one. It's the difference between, let me strike an analogy, it's a little graphic, of a soldier who has to fire upon one enemy soldier. Much easier to do if it's just one soldier. But if he's got a whole army coming at him and they're all firing, he's got an entirely different problem, doesn't he? If you isolate one fact and you destroy it, you can get the ha-ha moment out of your readers. You become a hero, you get tenure as a professor, you're making good money, your enmity pays off. But if you have to deal with all the facts, like that whole army coming at you, you got an entirely different problem. You got a contextual problem. This is one of the reasons why many historians don't want to go into the ancient world. They don't have to deal with this because the Bible keeps coming up with precision detail. And when you are stuck with your own enmity, that means you have a bias against the scriptures, no matter what they say, no matter what the facts read. You're going to neutralize each fact in order to make your enmity prevail. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to say, well, Dr. Sedlak, you're biased too. When it comes to the truth, the scripture, and the integrity of Christ, the deity of Christ, I'm downright bigoted. You see, being biased or prejudiced for the truth, when you can defend it, when you can uphold it. I am not so biased that I would risk my eternity, or rather my life, which I've given, to serving the Lord. I would certainly not do that if I believed the Bible had even one myth in it, let alone the kinds of attacks that are thrown at the scriptures all the time. But when it comes to having painstakingly studied the evidence, when I see that whole army or that whole avalanche, whatever metaphor you want, of the facts coming, and they're acting in concert with each other, they bear testimony. Yeah, you bet. I believe there's an integrity that deserves the bias to protect it from the opposite, the enmity that was shown against John Garstang, where for 20 years, journalists pled, scientists pled, find us something. Now, it's apparent that Kathleen Kenyon thought that she found something. You be the judge. I believe she was wrong. Not because of the bias. I understand her arguments. And I find her own statements at Jerusalem concerning carbon-14 as well, the omission of the pottery that Garstang had found. I find those facts disturbing. So, yeah, I can be biased, if you wish. I believe it's the duty of someone to be biased if they have the truth. You can't be neutral and defend a truth against an attack, because the passions get to be part of this. So leave it at that. I believe it's my duty to test the spirits to see if they're of God. I believe it's my duty to give an answer to Christ why I believe something is true, as well as why I might believe that something else is false. And so I study. And as you've seen or heard on this very program, I've studied literally thousands of claims of apparent contradictions. I've yet to find one that stuck. Our Lord Jesus said it when he said, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word shall never pass away." And his word has been kept time and again. If 2 + 2 is 4, and I certainly believe it is, I know you do too, you can say that a person's prejudiced who believes that. It is prejudicial, but it's also true, because it conforms to the rules of mathematics. And such a so-called prejudice surrounds it as with a shield to uphold the integrity of the truth. So again, as Jesus said, heaven and earth shall pass away, my word shall never pass away. The truth at Jericho stands, as Scripture relates, as John Garstang wrote.
This has been Choke Points Through Time with Dr. Wayne Sedlak. Visit us at visionviewpoint.com, where you'll find a host of articles, books, and videos designed to answer any questions you may have. Join us Tuesdays and Fridays for Choke Points Through Time with Dr. Wayne Sedlak.